What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mile High Hoops podcast. Talking to you after a winner from the Denver Nuggets. And boy, was it a tight one. It came down to maybe an eighth of an inch. What's lower than that? A 16th of an inch. That ball from RJ Barrett last night caught everything but the bottom of the net. And there's a great video of Nikola Jokic reacting under the basket as he sees the Denver Nuggets are going to lose. They're going to lose. Oh, no, they won. And they won 121-119 with the shot not falling at the buzzer. The complete inverse of last week when they played in Toronto against the Raptors, where Jamal Murray kisses the shot off the glass, goes in at the buzzer, extends that game to overtime. So two really tight battles with the Raptors. And I know a lot of people will probably be freaked out about that in a variety of ways because the Raptors, let's just be honest, are not going to be a great team this year. What I would tell you is they still have a lot of really talented NBA players. Even last night with Scotty Barnes out and then later Jakob Poeltl falling out of that contest. Kelly Olynyk was not playing in that contest. So they still have a lot of talented NBA players. And this is the time of year those teams still tend to do pretty well. They don't get into the tank portion of the season till late. I think the Raptors lost like 17 of 19 down the stretch last year. So that's what really pushed them back out of the playoff picture in the East. And I know the East playoff picture is a completely different thing than in the West, but that's why I just want to temper the expectations because going on the road, your first road trip of the year, it was tough. And then you face Toronto with basically without Aaron Gordon and Jamal Murray, and your bench is the worst bench in the NBA. So any losses to your starting five are going to hurt you more than any losses to the opposing team's starting five. So I'm not that concerned necessarily with like the overall outlook based off the fact that the Nuggets have played the Raptors tight twice. Like the scoring line does not concern me. There are things within the game that concern me a little bit, but the fact that the score was that tight does not concern me. So what I liked about last night, though, was Michael Malone was forced to go into his bench, and he has started to play Hunter Tyson. And this has happened over the last 3 games or so now with Dario Saric struggling and then Aaron Gordon banged up. Malone has had to go to another forward. And Hunter Tyson has looked pretty good. He's providing some valuable help side defense. He is hustling around a little bit. And I'm talking about a guy who scored 0 points last night. So it's not like, it was loud. But I thought in his minutes, he was fine. He was someone suitable of the NBA court, which is more than you can say sometimes of the people coming off the Nuggets bench. So I was good with Hunter Tyson last night. That's a positive. Who I was really good with was Peyton Watson, who came off the bench, scores 16 points, gets a 3, knocks down a bunch of free throws, couple blocks, couple steals. And this was the Peyton Watson that I think a lot of us maybe not expecting, but were hopeful for. This is the high outlook of Peyton, right? This guy, uber athletic, can do a lot of things defensively and then get out and run on the break, maybe hit a 3 over the course of the game, but is going to be someone that protects the rim and causes some havoc. And I think a lot of the Nuggets bench problems have come because of the fact that they don't really have an identity with that unit. And their identity should be very switchable defenders that get out and hustle and make things tough, and then occasionally get out and run and are able to get some buckets. And that's their primary way of scoring, which makes a lot of sense with Russell Westbrook, by the way. As the Russell Westbrook hater, he's still good in transition. So yeah, that would make sense. And last night you saw a lot of that with the Nuggets getting out in transition quite a bit. And they have not been a transition team over the course of the last, several years with Nikola Jokic. They're a plotting team. So having a bench unit with a different look is great. And I think Peyton Watson's a huge part of that, as is Julian Strawther, who hits 2 threes last night, gets 13 points, and was very good. What I loved about Julian last night, particularly, he was not good in the first half. Like, his defense was just not good. They were targeting him. They knew he was bad on defense. And in the second half, his defense was really good. or at least he was really hustling. And he was making some erratic plays at times, but they were based off of hustle. And I can always excuse maybe the wrong decision if you are trying hard. And you could tell Julian was trying hard. It's kind of like where Michael Porter Jr. was maybe 2-3 years ago with this defense, where you could see he was really trying to play good defense. And eventually he's learned and become a suitable defender. So I'm cool with where Julian's at. I thought his contributions were huge last night. Last night was the biggest bench scoring performance in a while from the Nuggets. I don't know if it was of the season because, Russ had that game where he had 22 off the bench. Russ had 21 in the starting lineup. We'll touch on that in a second. But the other youngster of the 4 youngsters is Christian Braun. And I want to make one thing very clear. I would have still kept KCP. And I know KCP is off to a bad start in Orlando. And I know that contract is probably going to age bad. But the question to me was never Christian or KCP. It was, how do you keep both Christian, KCP, and Aaron Gordon? And I thought you could have done it for a singular year and then address KCP in the offseason and maybe dealt him then. But in terms of a starting shooting guard, the drop off from the starting 5 with KCP to Christian Braun is what I expected, which is almost not noticeable. The biggest difference is there isn't as much spacing. And if Christian Braun is going to shoot the 3 with that much confidence, like he did last night when he hit a huge corner 3, it will be okay. Because that's why the Nuggets lost in Minnesota. Jamal goes down. You have Jamal out. So now you have Russ, Christian, and Aaron on the court with Mike and Nikola. So you have your big man, 1 shooter, and 3 guys that you're going to be happy with to take a 3. And they can't score down the stretch because Minnesota just clogs the paint and they lose that game. And for as good as Russell Westbrook was at times in that game, and as good as Christian Braun was at times in that game, the personnel dictated that the Nuggets were not able to win the game because they did not have space to do the things that they needed to do through Nikola Jokic. Fast forward, lesser team, maybe with a more cohesive plan because they knew Jamal wasn't going to be out there. Crunch time, Toronto, Christian's hitting his shots. Christian's making big defensive plays. Christian's being that uber athletic guy like we saw in Minnesota with the dunk on Rudy Gobert. That was pretty awesome. But he's doing some of those things again against Toronto. And we're getting pretty much, as Michael Malone would talk about, exactly what we expect from Christian. He always talks about, what you're going to get from Christian. And I think that's really important because right now, the Nuggets don't know what they're going to get from the other 3 young guys we just talked about. But they do know what they're going to get from Christian. And that's a really good starting point. So to have a starting 5 where all of the 5 guys, what you're more or less going to get from, that's your identity. The bench does not have that. The starting unit still has their identity. It was a little rough to start the season, and yet the Nuggets still have one of the best offensive ratings, if not the best in the NBA. I didn't check overnight. So I'm cool with where the youngsters are after this Toronto game. Maybe talk to me after Oklahoma City. We'll see how I'm feeling. But that's how I'm at right now, or where I'm at right now. But going into that Thunder game could be bad. Could be as ugly, if not uglier, than opening night. Jamal's in concussion protocol. We're going to find out in a couple hours here about Aaron Gordon's status as well. But you're very likely going to play that Oklahoma City Thunder game down 2 of your 5 starters. And as good as Zeke Naji was for stretches of the Toronto game, and as solid as Julian Strawther and Hunter Tyson looked, The Oklahoma City Thunder are a whole different beast. And what I will remind you at, and I don't think this is going to happen this year, but it's something to keep in mind. The Nuggets and Thunder tied atop the West last year with 57 wins. The reason the Nuggets got the number 2 seed instead of the number 1 seed was because the Oklahoma City Thunder won the season series. If they win on Wednesday night, I don't know if they play 3 or 4 times, that's on me, but they win at least a tie of that season series already in November. So this could be an important game come April about where the Nuggets end up in the playoffs. I do think this isn't going to matter because I think the Thunder are going to win a lot more games than the Nuggets. But it's something to keep in mind. Additionally, the Nuggets only have 1 win against Western Conference opponents right now. Oklahoma City's coming here on Wednesday. That looks pretty rough, as we're spelling out. Friday's against Miami. East should win that game. Sunday, Dallas, who looks awesome. We'll see. So we could go like 3 weeks into the NBA season with the Nuggets having 1 win against the West. That is really bad. And I'm not really sure what their path to winning is or what their margin for error is against a team like Oklahoma City when you have this many injuries. I already think their margin for error is so small. And that's something that we didn't have to deal with 2 years ago, right? They had so many different ways to win a basketball game. Their margin for error was pretty big because they could, maybe not hit their threes that night, or maybe they're struggling to get rebounds, whatever it might be. They had a pretty large margin. That doesn't exist, so much to the point that the Nuggets at 5-3 today, 3 of those 5 wins have come in games when they've shot 30 or more free throws. And yes, that is a recipe for success in getting to the free throw line. And I think that's really valuable, right? Those are the most efficient points in basketball. And the Nuggets simply did not get to the free throw line last year. So getting to the free throw line can be huge. But relying on the refs to grant you those fouls, when historically we've seen how that goes in Denver, there's not a lot of margin there. And that's what I'm trying to say. So that concerns me a little bit. By the way, the Nuggets are 4.5-point underdogs for that game as I look. And I'm sure the bookmakers are expecting Jamal and Aaron to be out. I'm surprised it's only 4.5, but 4.5 home underdogs, rare to see, especially with how much success the Nuggets have had at home in the Nikola Jokic era. But at home right now, they're only 2-2. So that's all I talked about in terms of what I was going to preview on today's pod. But I did want to touch on another thing. So we last talked to you on Thursday. And on Friday, ahead of the Minnesota Wolves game, on ESPN, ESPN.com dropped a giant piece on the Denver Nuggets inside as they prepared for the season that they waited to release a couple games into the season. Surprisingly, the day that they were first on ESPN. Now, this piece, I thought, was very slanted towards Calvin Booth in favor of him and setting Michael Malone up to be the fall man. I wrote a story on Friday, which I'd recommend you all checking out. It's very dense and very long. It's called The Questions ESPN's Bombshell ESPN Report. Nuggets Report didn't answer. That's on denversports.com. But yeah, I thought this is basically very from Calvin Booth and the front office's perspective, and it starts to lay the blame to Michael Malone for a flawed roster, which obviously he doesn't control. And it was very, very friendly to Calvin Booth. And among the chief things that are pertinent to this season is Calvin Booth admitted tension with Michael Malone, which is something that was rumored this offseason, something I've written about, something I've talked about. I'm not surprised that this is true because I've hinted at it. I've talked about it. I've written about it. But to have a on the record quote from one of them, basically admitting that letting KCP walk brought in a lot of tension between the two, I thought was fascinating that they got that on the record. I also thought Booth blaming Malone for the Zeke contract. I mean, not for the Zeke contract, but Zeke basically taking a giant step back the last couple of years was uncalled for, particularly when Booth was the one who signed him to a giant extension that was maybe not, well, not maybe, but completely unworthy. Another point was basically Michael Porter Jr. coming out and saying it's championship or bust. And I think that's wild, but also in the context of this article where they're talking about Mike was going to be traded for Paul George, I understand why Michael feels that way, because he's the constant talk of trade rumors. And the Nuggets will have an inflection point after this season of what they want to do with their core members. On the on the Paul George thing, I think that's complete hogwash. I do not think that there was ever a real Paul George possibility of him coming to Denver. He would have wanted to come here. I don't see why the Nuggets would have wanted a 34-year-old forward. I think that's thrown out as the Nuggets had a bigger offseason plan that didn't work, and this is what we're trying to do. I think that was a complete smokescreen by Booth. But you look at the Clippers, and I try to figure out why they would want Porter. They were slashing salary this offseason. They were the team that medically red flagged Porter, like very famously. And all of a sudden they're going to get Porter and Zeke Najee's contract and a first round pick for Paul George. I think there's a reason why the Clippers said we would rather just not have anything than that. I don't think the Nuggets really want Paul George here. I don't think that would have worked out all that well. So I'm calling hogwash on that. This article confirmed Jokic is responsible for the Westbrook signing, which we've talked about. But I also think that Calvin Booth is kind of throwing away some of the blame that's going to come from what the Russell Westbrook signing may result in, because it's a no-lose position for Calvin Booth to be like, look, my star player did this, and this is what he wanted, so I did it. And I'm a player-friendly GM. If it works out, people are going to say, wow, he listens to his players. If it doesn't, people are going to say, well, Nikola Jokic should stop meddling in Calvin Booth's business. So it's a no-lose position. And Calvin Booth is probably going to get an extension, which is fascinating as well, given the last two off seasons have been pretty rough. And, you know, Calvin Booth also has the hope that the trio, and now I guess quad something. I don't know the word for that, of young players. He believed some of them would be able to guard Jason Tatum in the NBA Finals in their rookie or sophomore years. And I think that's ludicrous to expect that of a guy, of any young player, but one that is drafted past 20 in the NBA draft. So there are more questions that came up within this article. And I thought it was really telling that it was not brought up that the Nuggets failed in the Jalen Pickett draft. They have had roster spots occupied by players that have not helped their team throughout their championship run, throughout last year, throughout this year. And it's something Calvin Booth could have addressed. And it just simply wasn't mentioned in the article. And then all of a sudden on Monday night, it was on Monday night, you get it dropped. Hey, the Nuggets have interest in bringing in Lonnie Walker, which is what I've been screaming for all offseason. Because while Lonnie Walker is not maybe a solution to everything that's gone wrong with the Nuggets, he's a capable NBA player right now today. And that's what the Denver Nuggets need. And Jalen Pickett is not that. And all you need to do is cut Jalen Pickett and convince Lonnie Walker to sign here. And it's an upgrade. And it's something the Nuggets probably should have done last year with some players that were out there in the market, and they didn't. And it's something the Nuggets should absolutely do this year as well. So that was not brought up in the article, but it was nice to see Mark Stein linked the Nuggets to Lonnie Walker. And for us to know that the Nuggets roster is not set in stone this season, which I think is really important because the trade deadline, eventually when that comes, the Nuggets are going to be pretty locked into what they do, but that doesn't mean they can't hit the buyout market and maybe pick up some guys by clearing a roster spot or two, which is something that'll be an issue with this team because they have players that are on guaranteed contracts that should not be on guaranteed contracts. Anyway, read that article. We'll talk to you on Thursday on the Mile High Hoops podcast. We'll recap the Thunder game. We'll talk about the Heat game moving forward. Enjoy your night off of NBA basketball. I'm Jake Shapiro. This is the Mile High Hoops podcast. Make sure you go to Denver Sports on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you boost our YouTube algo if you like this content. It is greatly appreciated.